Hello students, I am at the Utah Science Teachers Association conference presenting our photosynthesis lab as inquiry. So I'm coming to you as a recording from last night. We're going to talk about soil and plant nutrition. This image should be familiar to those of you that have taken or are taking U.S. or American history right now. This image represents the Dust Bowl during the early to mid 1900s in the Midwest part of the United States. The problem that occurred here came from overgrazing. Not overgrazing, but over-tilling of land that led to a lot of soil erosion and these big dust clouds that you can see here. So today we're going to talk about the importance of soil, and we'll preview a little bit of what we're going to do later in the year with ecology and learn of the importance yet again of plants. This image right here is called a soil horizon sample. So typically the layer that supports life is this top layer called the A horizon. And it's got a mixture of sand, clay, and silt. And they're arranged in layers. Those layers then are called soil horizons. So that top part again is called topsoil, and topsoil contains the minerals that plants need to survive. It also contains a substance called humus, not hummus as some of you put on pitas, but humus is dead and decaying organic material that is very rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and other minerals that plants need to absorb in order to make proteins and nucleic acids, and also to maintain the photosynthesis reactions. So plants get these nutrients from soil. When rain falls down, water drains from the larger spaces in the soil, but the smaller spaces retain that water because water is attracted to clay. Clay has a charge on it, and if you remember, water is a polar molecule, and so water is going to stick to the clay and other small particles. So it's that water that's available to plants, and plant roots and root hairs are what are able to absorb that water from the soil. So this term is a good term to know, loams. Loams are the most fertile topsoils, and we refer to loamy soils as soils, as you can read down there, contain equal amounts of sand, silt, and clay. So the composition of topsoil, we talk about two things: inorganic and organic chemical compounds. So again, in this part right here, inorganic compounds would be the things that did not come from living things, minerals, and organic compounds that come from the dead and decaying matter in those soils. Okay, so first of all, your book talks a little bit about inorganic compounds, and this is a little bit of a review from chemistry. Cations, remember, are positively charged particles, so your book gives the examples of potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Soil is negatively charged, so these cations are able to adhere to soil particles, and that prevents them from leaching out. Leaching is when water goes through the soil, and as it soaks down through the soil, that refers to the leaching away of minerals that are soluble in water. But since these minerals are positively charged, they stick to the negatively charged clay particles, and they don't leach out. We call that leach out. Okay, so let's talk about cation exchange. So how do plants get these necessary minerals in to the roots? If they're stuck on these soil particles, you can imagine that it's going to be hard for them just to, jump off and be absorbed into a root hair. So what root hairs do is they actively pump protons or hydrogen ions into the soil, and those hydrogen ions displace the other ions on the soil particles. So it's kind of like an exchange. You're exchanging those hydrogen ions for a different ion, and then those ions like calcium and potassium and magnesium can be absorbed into the root hair. And those hydrogen ions, the source of that is from carbon dioxide. As carbon dioxide exits the root, and we kind of don't think of that a lot because we're used to thinking that plants do photosynthesis and so they absorb carbon dioxide, but in the roots a lot of carbon dioxide is released because a lot of cellular respiration is going on inside of the root cells. So when that carbon dioxide reacts or dissolves in water, it reacts to form carbonic acid. So remember, an acid is a proton donor, and as that dissolves, those protons displace these positively charged ions on soil particles. This is a lot like how your water softener works, but instead of protons, it's sodium ions that displace minerals like calcium that make your water hard, and sodium ions are less hard than calcium ions on your hard water. You'll notice if you have hard water because it'll leave those calcium deposits on your shower head, and if you have a water softener, then those are not as frequent because those sodium ions are displacing the calcium ions and they get trapped inside the medium of your water softener. Okay, so again, all these things that are stuck to those soil particles are essential for plants, and plants use that neat property of displacement to get what they need into the roots. Alright, switching gears to organic compounds. This word humus, again not humus, builds a soil that's really crumbly and it retains water very well, but at the same time it's still porous. Porosity is important because plants, their roots need oxygen in order to do cellular respiration, to sustain life for those cells. These organic compounds increase the soil's capacity to exchange cations. It's a reserve of mineral nutrients. It's really complex. Topsoil is just a really complex ecosystem, just kind of a micro ecosystem in that topsoil that contains many living things. So your book lists a few: bacteria, fungi, algae, other protists, insects, earthworms, nematodes, plant roots, a lot of the stuff that we learned about in the biodiversity unit. And soil has a very rich biodiversity. 1 teaspoon of soil, if you guys remember, contains billions of individual bacteria and probably thousands of species. So what do these organisms do? Remember, well, you probably don't remember this because we haven't discussed it yet, but they're called detritivores. We will learn more about that in when we get into our ecology units. And these detritivores help to decompose all of the organic materials, and that allows those organic materials to be available for uptake by plants. So all of these things, we typically think, oh, get rid of bacteria, it's bad, or fungi is bad, or these protists and parasites are bad. But without them, soil would not be fertile enough to sustain plant life. So very important part of the soil ecosystem. Let's talk a little bit about agriculture. Natural ecosystems self-sustain. So all of those nutrients are maintained through natural processes. However, agriculture, planting of crops, depletes mineral contents of soils. It puts a strain on water reserves and encourages erosion. So this idea of sustainable agriculture uses methods that help to conserve the soil, and at the same time they can be economically profitable for farmers that use these sustainability techniques. And again, this is just kind of a preview of things that we'll do later in the year when we talk about ecology. One of the things that agriculture can do to harm soils on a very large scale is when water is pumped from groundwater sources to irrigate crops, and you get a land sinking, or what's called land subsidence. This is a really dramatic example of land subsidence in California over a huge area, where in 1925 this was the elevation of the land, and its subsidence, I can't say that word, it's been lowered several meters from 1925 to 1977. That was over like a huge area, the San Joaquin Valley, and it took 50 years for it to go down that far. So it's going down inches a year. But on a more rapid scale, you can see, like in Florida, where huge chunks of land just sink into the earth because the water underneath them has been depleted by irrigation, and they cause what are called sinkholes, and this is a picture of a sinkhole in Florida. Irrigation can also lead to increasing the concentration of salts in the soil as the water evaporates, because water carries dissolved minerals and salts with it, and then when it evaporates it leaves them behind. One of the ways to combat the effects of using a lot of groundwater, like land subsidence and salinization of the soil, is to use a technique called drip irrigation, which reduces the amount of water that you have to use, because in drip irrigation water is put directly into the roots in the exact amounts that the roots need to survive, and so that costs a lot less water than traditional methods of irrigation like flood irrigation or sprinkler irrigation. Okay, so in order to counteract depletion of minerals and nutrients in the soil, fertilizers have to be used in agriculture to replace the minerals and nutrients that get lost when plants take them up. The most common things that fertilizers have in them, commercial fertilizers, are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those would be fertilizers that are produced in a factory, typically like you see Scott's. You'll use that. Maybe your family uses that on their lawn in the spring or in the summer, and those would be just commercial sources of these chemicals. Organic fertilizers have these same chemicals, nitrogen compounds, phosphorus, and potassium, but they come from sources that are organic, and that means they come from animals. You'll see people that use steer or chicken manure on their lawn. Fish meal, ground up fish meal, is another one that's used, or even vegetable compost that has been broken down and can be spread over a lawn or even a garden or even a large agricultural field, and that gives the plants their source of nitrogen. pH, this is a review of what we learned in our chemistry unit. If you remember, pH is a measure of the concentration of hydrogen ions in solution, and slightly acidic soils release more hydrogen ions, and so they can displace more minerals from the clay particles. So acid rain can actually hurt soils by depleting those soils from minerals and making them less available for plants.